every single person the avoidant has ever been involved with, every relationship they've cycled through, every connection they've formed, and then systematically dismantled through their withdrawal and their fear and their inability to sustain what was offered to them. None of them compare to you. Not one, not even close. And this isn't romantic exaggeration or the kind of nostalgic inflation that happens when we look back on relationships through lens of loss and longing. This is something the avoidant is confronting with brutal clarity now that you're gone, something they're forced to acknowledge because the evidence is overwhelming and undeniable, and no amount of defensive narrative can obscure it. You were the best person they ever had. Not the most exciting or the most dramatic or the most passionate in ways that create intensity but ultimately burn out. The best. The most genuinely good for them. The most consistently present. The most authentically caring. The most psychologically sophisticated in how you love them. The most patient without being a pushover. The most understanding without being enabling. The most real, more real than anyone else they've ever stood in front of and allowed themselves to be even partially known by. And they didn't see it while it was happening. They couldn't see it because seeing it would have required them to be present enough, open enough, honest enough with themselves to recognize what was being offered. And their entire psychological system was designed to prevent exactly that kind of honesty, because honesty meant vulnerability, and vulnerability meant danger, and danger meant they needed to protect themselves, even if protecting themselves meant destroying the best thing that ever happened to them, which is exactly what they did. They destroyed the best person they ever had, because the best person they ever had made them feel things they weren't equipped to handle, created closeness they weren't built to sustain, offered love that demanded a level of emotional availability they hadn't developed the capacity for. And now, they're feeling it. Now that you're gone, now that the absence has created space where your presence used to be, now that every comparison they make between you and anyone else who's come after reveals the staggering gap between what they had and what they have now, they're feeling the full, crushing weight of having lost the best person they ever had through their own inability to hold on to them. The feeling isn't abstract or intellectual. It's visceral. It's physical. It's the kind of pain that arrives in the chest at unexpected moments, that surfaces in the throat during conversations that remind them of what they destroyed, that lives in their body as constant low-grade ache, punctuated by sharp episodes of recognition that what they lost was not just significant, but was irreplaceable in ways they're only now beginning to fully understand. Why you were different from everyone else they ever had, and why they're only seeing this now. The avoidant has been in relationships before, some short, some longer, some that felt significant at the time, but something about you was fundamentally different from every other person they've been involved with, and understanding what made you different reveals why losing you creates specific pain that previous losses never created. You were different because you loved them without trying to change them. Every other person the avoidant has been with has communicated, either explicitly or through their frustration and their eventual departure, that the avoidant needs to be different, needs to show up more, needs to be more emotionally available, needs to stop withdrawing, needs to become someone other than who they are. These communications, however justified, created pressure that made the avoidant defend more intensely, because pressure activated their fear of being controlled, of being insufficient, of being someone who can never meet expectations no matter how hard they try. You did something radically different. You loved who they actually were, not who they could be if they worked on themselves, not who they'd become if they finally faced their wounds, but the actual complicated, defended, scared person standing in front of you right now, with all their limitations and all their wounds and all their inability to show up the way a healthy partner should show up. This loving of the actual person rather than the potential person was so rare in their experience that they didn't recognize it as distinct quality while it was happening. They're recognizing it now in every new interaction where someone expresses disappointment in who they are rather than acceptance of who they are. And the recognition is devastating because it reveals how precious your acceptance was and how thoroughly they failed to honor it. You were different because you maintained your own identity and your own life so completely that being with you never felt like the suffocating merger they feared intimacy would create. Previous partners either lost themselves in the relationship, becoming dependent, losing their own interests, making the avoidant responsible for their happiness, which triggered the avoidant's engulfment terror and drove them to withdraw. Or they maintained independence, but in ways that felt cold or disconnected, never truly creating the warmth and depth that makes relationship feel worthwhile. You somehow occupied the exact middle ground that the avoidant desperately needed, but never believed existed, deeply warm and genuinely connected while maintaining your own complete identity, your own friendships, your own interests, your own life that was rich and fulfilling, independent of the relationship. This balance, intimacy without merger, was so precisely what the avoidance wounds required that it actually began dissolving their defenses in ways no previous relationship had, and they didn't understand what was happening or why they felt safer with you than with anyone else until you were gone. And every subsequent interaction felt either suffocating or hollow by comparison. You were different because you saw through their defenses without making them feel exposed or ashamed. Every other person who saw through the avoidance patterns, who recognized the withdrawal for what it was, who identified the fear driving the behavior, responded with either frustration that made the avoidant feel judged, or with pity that made them feel pathetic, or with demands that they change that made them feel controlled. You saw through everything, saw the fear, saw the wounds, saw the defensive patterns operating in real time, and you responded with something entirely different. Compassionate understanding that somehow made being seen feel safe rather than threatening. You could name exactly what they were doing and why without making them feel like they were broken or wrong for doing it. And this specific combination of clear perception paired with non-judgmental understanding was so unusual in their experience that it created an environment where their defenses actually began to soften. They're recognizing now, in its absence, that this environment was precious beyond anything they understood while they were living in it. Every interaction since has felt harsh by comparison. Every relationship since has felt unsafe, and the safety you created is revealed as the rarest and most valuable thing you offered them. You were different because your patience was genuine and rooted in actual understanding rather than in inability to leave or in hope that they would eventually change. The avoidant has experienced patience before, partners who stayed through their difficult behavior, who gave them chances, who expressed understanding. But that patience was always tinged with expectation. The implicit message beneath the patience was, I'm being patient because I believe you'll get better, and if you don't, I'm leaving. Your patience was different. It was rooted in genuine understanding of why they were the way they were, in genuine compassion for the wounds driving their behavior, in genuine belief that they were worth loving even as they were, not just as they might become. This quality of patience, patient not because of hope for change, but because of genuine acceptance of the person as they are, was something the avoidant had never encountered, and they're encountering its absence now in every interaction where patience is conditional on improvement and they feel the difference, like cold wind after years of warmth. You were different because you created space where the avoidant could be vulnerable without feeling punished for it. In previous relationships, moments of vulnerability, moments where they lowered defenses and showed something real and raw, were often followed by the other person either pulling away in discomfort or using the vulnerability against them in future conflicts. These experiences taught the avoidant that vulnerability leads to punishment, that showing real self leads to rejection or exploitation. With you, vulnerability led to something entirely different. It led to being held, to being met with warmth, to being made to feel that what they shared was honored rather than weaponized. This safety around vulnerability was so foreign to their experience that they couldn't fully trust it while it existed. They kept waiting for the punishment that previous experience taught them would follow. It never came. And now that you're gone, and every interaction feels like potential punishment for any vulnerability they might show, they understand with devastating clarity what you were providing and how completely they failed to appreciate it while you were providing it. How the feeling of having lost the best person they ever had is actually manifesting in their daily life. The avoidance recognition that you were the best person they ever had isn't sitting quietly in their consciousness as abstract realization. It's manifesting in specific ways throughout their daily experience, creating effects they can feel, but often cannot identify the source of, until they trace every thread back to you and to what your absence means. Understanding how this feeling manifests reveals the depth of its impact on their present life. It manifests as inability to be genuinely excited about anything, because every potential positive experience is immediately compared to experience of having you in their life and found wanting. They receive good news at work and feel nothing. They're invited somewhere interesting and feel hollow enthusiasm that doesn't reach anything genuine inside them. They encounter beautiful sunset or delicious meal or moment that would have moved them before, and they feel the moment, but cannot access the depth of feeling it deserves, because the depth of feeling has been dulled by the persistent awareness that the best thing in their life is gone. This dulling isn't depression in clinical sense. It's specific emotional dampening that occurs when the primary source of genuine feeling has been removed and nothing else creates sufficient depth to activate the capacity for real emotional engagement. Everything feels slightly muted, slightly insufficient, slightly less than what life felt like when you were in it. It manifests as specific loneliness that exists even in middle of social situations, a loneliness that's about being with the wrong people rather than about being with no people. They're at dinner with friends and laughing and participating and appearing engaged, and beneath all of it is awareness that none of these people see them the way you saw them. None of these people understand them the way you understood them. None of these conversations create the specific feeling of being genuinely known that conversations with you created. The loneliness isn't about lacking company. It's about lacking the specific quality of connection you provided. And no amount of company can address loneliness. That's about depth rather than about presence. They're surrounded by people and profoundly alone in ways they cannot explain to anyone, because explaining would require admitting they had something extraordinary and destroyed it. It manifests as growing irritability with themselves, not the kind that comes from external stress, but the kind that comes from persistent self-confrontation about who they proved themselves to be through how they treated you. They look in mirror and see person who had the best person they ever had and couldn't sustain it. They go through their day making choices and measuring each choice against the question of whether the person they were when they were with you, the person capable of loving you despite their fear, would make the same choice. They're living with constant internal critic that didn't exist before or existed quietly before and is now loud and persistent and impossible to silence, because the evidence of their own failure to be worthy of what you offered is too clear and too recent to rationalize away. It manifests as specific physical symptoms that arrive without obvious cause: tightness in chest during moments that remind them of you, heaviness in body during evenings that used to be spent with you, difficulty catching breath during moments where grief surfaces unexpectedly. These physical symptoms are the body's way of carrying what the mind is trying to manage intellectually: the grief, the regret, the recognition of loss that the avoidant psychological system cannot fully process, because fully processing it would require sustained vulnerability they still struggle with. The body holds what the mind won't fully acknowledge, and the symptoms are evidence of emotional weight being carried without adequate processing or expression. It manifests as hyper-awareness of couples everywhere, in public spaces, on social media, in movies and television, where previously couples were background noise, and now they're foreground confrontation. Every couple they see is mirror, showing them what they had and what they destroyed. Every display of affection creates specific ache that they cannot look away from, because it's showing them exactly what their life could have contained if they'd been capable of sustaining what you offered. This hyper-awareness wasn't present before the loss became fully felt. It arrived as consequence of finally confronting what they lost, and it persists because the confrontation hasn't been resolved through any action that would address it. It manifests as dreams about you that arrive without invitation and leave them unsettled upon waking. Dreams where you're present, where the relationship exists, where they're experiencing the warmth and safety and connection that characterize being with you, and then waking to reality where none of this exists and they're alone with the knowledge that the dream showed them life they destroyed. The dreams aren't nostalgic or pleasant. They're torturous because they provide brief window into what was lost and then close that window, leaving them more aware of the absence than they were before sleep. It manifests as difficulty being intimate with anyone else, because every intimate moment is unconsciously compared to intimacy with you, and the comparison creates barrier to genuine connection. They try to be present with new person, but part of their mind is comparing. This person doesn't create what you created. This closeness doesn't feel what yours felt. This connection doesn't reach the depth yours reached. The comparison isn't fair to new person, and the avoidant knows it isn't fair, but they cannot stop it, because you set standard that no one else has come close to meeting, and their body and their heart know this, even when their mind tries to remain open to possibility. What they're feeling of having lost the best person they ever had reveals about their capacity for change. The way the avoidant is processing the recognition that you were the best person they ever had reveals specific information about whether this pain will lead to genuine transformation or whether it will simply become another layer of defended suffering they carry without allowing it to change them. Understanding what their current state reveals about their capacity helps you assess the situation with clarity. Their willingness to actually sit with the feeling rather than immediately defending against it reveals whether the confrontation will lead somewhere meaningful. The avoidant who can acknowledge, even privately, even briefly, I lost the best person I ever had and it was my fault, is demonstrating capacity for honesty that their patterns have previously prevented. If they can sustain this honesty long enough to feel its full weight, long enough to let it motivate action, rather than simply creating pain they defend against, the feeling has potential to become catalyst for real change. If the honesty is quickly followed by return to defensive narrative, well, the relationship wasn't right anyway. I would have been unhappy eventually. Then, the confrontation is being managed rather than processed and is unlikely to lead to transformation. Their response to the pain determines whether it becomes fuel for growth or fuel for deeper defense. Pain that's met with curiosity. Why did I do this? What drove these choices? What would I need to change? Leads toward therapy and genuine work. Pain that's met with numbness or with intensified avoidance leads toward deeper defense and continued pattern repetition. The avoidant who uses this specific pain as reason to finally seek therapy To finally address attachment wounds they've been defending against their entire life is responding to loss in a way that honors what you meant to them by refusing to let the same patterns destroy future relationships. The avoidant who uses this pain as confirmation that relationships are dangerous and that protecting themselves through distance is justified is responding to loss in a way that guarantees they'll destroy every future relationship the same way they destroyed theirs with you. Their capacity for change is revealed by whether they can distinguish between the pain of losing you and the pain of confronting who they are, whether they can recognize these are related but separate experiences that require different responses. Missing you requires grief and time. Confronting who they prove themselves to be through their patterns requires therapeutic work and sustained effort to develop new capacities. Conflating these two, treating the pain as simply about missing you rather than also about the patterns that created the loss, prevents the confrontation from leading to change because it keeps focus on what was lost rather than on what needs to change within them to prevent losing the next person who offers them what you offered. Their willingness to accept help, whether from therapist, from trusted friend, from any source that can provide perspective and support, reveals whether the pain is motivating them toward connection or toward further isolation. The avoidant who reaches out when they're suffering, who admits to someone they trust that they're struggling, who seeks support rather than trying to manage everything alone. This person is demonstrating that the loss has cracked open something that might allow genuine healing. The avoidant who retreats further into isolation when confronted with this pain is demonstrating that their fundamental pattern, withdrawal when vulnerable, is still operating even when the pattern has been revealed as the cause of their greatest loss. What the avoidant finally feeling the loss of the best person they ever had actually means for you, the avoidant's painful confrontation with having lost you, the best person they ever had, has specific meaning for you and for how you understand your own experience and your own healing. Understanding what their suffering means for you helps you find peace that's independent of their journey, but informed by it. Their feeling means you were right about everything you felt during the relationship. The depth you experienced was real. The significance you perceived was accurate. The love you gave was received, even when their behavior communicated otherwise. Every moment you wondered whether you were imagining the connection. Every time you questioned whether your investment was matched by genuine feeling on their part. You weren't imagining anything. The connection was real. The feeling was mutual. And the loss they're experiencing now is proportional to the significance of what existed between you. This confirmation doesn't erase your pain, but it eliminates the specific suffering of self-doubt that often accompanies loss when the other person's feelings weren't clearly communicated during the relationship. Their feeling means you can release yourself from any remaining belief that you weren't enough, that if you'd been different, more patient, more understanding, better in some way, the relationship would have survived. The relationship didn't end because you were insufficient. It ended because they were incapable of sustaining what you offered, not because of anything about you, but because of wounds inside them that prevented them from being present with someone as genuinely good as you were. You were the best person they ever had. The relationship ended not because the best person they ever had wasn't good enough, but because they weren't yet developed enough to hold on to the best person they ever had. The insufficiency was theirs. The goodness was yours. Their feeling means the most powerful and healing thing you can do isn't anything directed at them, but is continuing to be exactly who you are. Because who you are was extraordinary enough to be the best person they ever had. And that extraordinariness doesn't diminish because one person couldn't sustain it. You will be the best person someone else ever has too. Someone who has the capacity you deserve, the presence you require, the emotional availability that honors what you bring. That person exists. that person will see you immediately, not in retrospect, not through painful education, not after losing you and spending months confronting what they destroyed. They'll see you in real time, in the present moment, while you're right there, offering exactly what you offered the avoidant, and they'll hold on to it. They'll sustain it. They'll be worthy of it in the way the avoidant couldn't be. You were the best person the avoidant ever had. Now you're gone, and they're feeling it. But you were always more than the best person they ever had. You were always the best person, period. And that truth exists independent of whether they hold on to you or whether they let you go. It exists independent of whether they grow or whether they stay defended. It exists independent of anything they do or don't do with the pain they're currently feeling. You are extraordinary. You remain extraordinary. And the person who finally gets to keep you, who finally gets to sustain what you offer without destroying it through fear, will spend every single day of their life recognizing exactly what they have in real time while it's happening, not after it's gone. Not in the painful education that arrives too late, but in the present moment, with full awareness, with genuine gratitude, with the capacity to hold what you offer because they were never too afraid to receive it. That person is coming, and you were always worthy of them, even when the avoidant couldn't see it, especially when the avoidant couldn't see it, because the avoidant's inability to see it was never about your worth. It was always about their wounds, and your worth was never diminished by their wounds. Not for a single moment. Not ever. The avoidant's inability to see it was never about your worth. It was always about their wounds, and your worth was never diminished by their wounds. Not for a single moment. Not ever. But here is what matters most right now. What matters more than their pain, more than their regret, more than the education they're receiving through the devastation of losing you. What matters most is what this entire experience is teaching you about yourself and about what you deserve and about the standard you now carry forward into everything that comes next. Because the avoidant suffering, however genuine, however deserved, however much, it confirms everything you already suspected about the significance of what existed between you. Their suffering is not the point. The point is you. The point is who you are and what you've learned and what you now understand about the kind of love you require and the kind of person who's capable of providing it. The avoidant taught you something invaluable through the pain they caused. They taught you exactly what healthy love looks like by showing you what unhealthy love looks like, taught you exactly what you need by showing you what you cannot accept, taught you exactly where your boundaries must be by testing every boundary you had and revealing which ones you enforced and which ones you allowed to dissolve. This education was brutal. It was painful. It cost you time and energy and emotional resources you'll never fully recover. But it gave you something equally valuable: clarity, complete, unshakable, bone-deep clarity about who you are, what you bring, what you deserve, and what you will never again accept from anyone who wants access to your heart. You know now that you were the best person they ever had. You know this not because they told you, they probably never did, but because the evidence of your own experience confirmed it. You loved someone who made loving them genuinely difficult, and you did it with grace, and with patience, and with boundaries, and with compassion, and with your own identity fully intact throughout. You gave someone the rarest gift available to another human being, genuine acceptance of who they actually were, not who you wished they'd become. And you gave it freely and consistently, and without making them feel guilty for receiving it. You maintained yourself while loving them. You saw them clearly while loving them. You held boundaries while loving them. These aren't small achievements. These are evidence of psychological sophistication that most people spend years in therapy trying to develop, and you possessed it naturally, expressed it authentically, and offered it without reservation to someone who couldn't receive it properly. Carry this forward, not as wound, not as cautionary tale, not as evidence that love leads to pain or that vulnerability leads to being taken advantage of. Carry it forward as proof of who you are, proof that you're capable of loving at extraordinary depth while maintaining extraordinary self-respect, proof that you can see another person completely while remaining completely yourself, proof that you can offer the rarest form of acceptance while still knowing your own worth well enough to walk away when that worth isn't being honored. The right person will receive what the avoidant couldn't receive. The right person will see what the avoidant couldn't see. The right person will hold what the avoidant couldn't hold, not because they're perfect or because they'll never struggle, but because they'll have the capacity, the willingness, the emotional development required to sustain what you offer without destroying it through fear. That person will look at you the way you deserve to be looked at from the very beginning, not in retrospect, not through painful education delivered too late, but in real time, with full presence, with genuine gratitude for having someone exactly like you choosing to share their life with them. You were the best person the avoidant ever had. Remember this, not as sad ending, but as magnificent confirmation of everything you are. The story isn't over. It's simply moving from chapter where your extraordinary qualities were wasted on someone incapable of receiving them to chapter where those same qualities find the person they were always meant for. That person will never need to lose you to understand what you're worth. They'll know from the very first moment, and they'll spend every day after that moment making sure you know they know.